Today, let's sew the alley skirt from NH Patterns. Welcome, I do sewing and DIY related content, and today we are sewing the alley skirt from NH Patterns. So I actually made a mock-up of this in this black material to see if I liked it, and the only change I decided to do for this fabric is to make the skirt longer. So this is fabric that I have had now for almost over a year. It was really expensive when I first got it, so I wanted to make sure that whatever I was doing with it was going to be perfect. Now it had all these beads, so I did have to go through and remove the beads for wherever the seam allowance was going to be, but otherwise I was just ready to get started with this fabric and begin using it. So the skirt pattern overall is really simple to follow. The instructions were fantastic for it. The first steps were you needed to add some darts for both the two pieces in the back, as well as you'll have two darts in your front piece. So for this, I just went through and very carefully pinned where my darts were going to be. I also did make sure that wherever I was adding those darts and where I was going to be taking it, there was no beads there that I was going to be having to sew through, as I did very quickly learn that if there was even one bead and the needle tried to go through it, the needle would break. So here is the kitty. She also helped me through all of this. So once I added the darts for the outside material, the skirt does have a lining, so I needed to add the darts for the inside material as well for that lining. Now, one little tip I did want to include is that when you're sewing darts, I've seen a lot of people say not to backstitch and instead knot it so that it just lays a little flatter. So here is what that dart looks like on the fabric. I absolutely love how it turned out and how it was looking. This fabric is just so pretty with all of those little beads and that tweed effect. So now it was time to sew essentially the two side seams together so that you would have the one front seam with those two pieces on the back, and then we have an invisible zipper that will be going on the back as our closure. Now what I really loved about this pattern was how much symmetry there almost was. So everything you were doing for the outside of your fabric, you were doing for the lining as well, which just made it really easy and really quick to put together and to work through. So as you can see here, I'm just going through and sewing those two side seams, and then we just need to add the waistband at the top. So the waistband, you do need to add some interfacing too. You can see I already have my interfacing included on there, and I'm just going to be matching the waistband with the right sides to the main portion of the skirt and then sewing that in place as well. So a lot of this was very quick, very easy to work through, and this is what the skirt sort of looks like so far, which I love that you could already see how it was going to come together. I loved how the beads looked on it, and then on the back, of course, we're going to be adding that invisible zipper, and I would say that's the only slightly tricky part is the invisible zipper. Now you do need to finish your edges for this whole skirt. I decided to use a serger. I did change my needles, especially for this lining material, as I found that for the lining I needed a smaller needle. So those overlock needles worked perfectly for this, and I got a really nice and clean overlock stitch. So as I mentioned, we're just going to be repeating everything that we did for the outside of the skirt for the lining. Now I do think that if I ever made this again, I would have the waistband not actually be this tweed. It is a little itchy if you don't have anything on against your skin. I wasn't thinking that through, and I just cut out two, very similar to how the pattern had said to, but it's not that big of a deal, especially if you just wear a tank top or you have your shirt tucked in. So now that I have the lining complete, it is now time to move on to the invisible zipper step. So I always test my invisible zippers first just to make sure that they do zip how they're supposed to, and then it was time to press it out so that those zipper coils kind of move and you're able to get them nice and flat. This is going to help give you that really great invisible zipper look. And I will say that I did have to do this invisible zipper about 2 or 3 times just because this fabric was so thick. I did struggle with it, trying to get it to lay perfectly even when I was basting it first. So my biggest recommendation is whenever you're doing an invisible zipper to always baste the zipper first so that you can see if you do like how it is laying. And then also when we are sewing up that invisible zipper, be sure you are using your invisible zipper foot. So I got my machine all adjusted and ready to go, and then I just began basting in the invisible zipper. I found that basting it in, again, is just a really great step, and you don't have to worry about trying to go through and very carefully undoing everything. Especially for a pattern like this where that invisible zipper is your main closure, you really want to make sure it looks good. So as you can see, I did do a little test to make sure my zipper could open and close, which it was looking good so far. So now it was just time to work on the second side. So for the second side, I pinned that in place and then just did the exact same basting seam to see if I liked how it was laying. So once I had my zipper exactly how I liked, I got it nice and smooth. It was opening and closing exactly how it should. It was then time to finish off the bottom portion, so essentially pinning up the rest of the skirt so that we can have this whole seam complete. So I'm just going to be taking a straight stitch here, and then this is going to allow us to have the outside of our skirt actually done. So one thing I will mention for this entire skirt is that everything's really done in a straight stitch, so that makes it really easy and really quick to sew. So as you can see, I'm just going through, sewing up that middle back seam, and then going as close as I can to the zipper to make sure that everything is laying nice and flat and smooth. So now it's time to attach the lining to our actual skirt portion on the outside, and to do this you need to measure how far down your zipper goes, so how far that seam is, and then you're going to be taking your lining and marking however much that measurement was. So mine was about 9 inches long, so I just put a pin there, and then I'm going to pin the rest of the skirt down. So you're going to be leaving the top portion of the lining open, as that is going to be done later when we are worrying about how we're getting our zipper to attach. So I'm just going to take that straight seam. Again, the instructions for this were all really well done, and she has a lot of really great pictures in there for specifically how you would do these steps. So I found it very easy to work through all of this. I did go ahead and just take a hem all the way around the lining. I made my hem be really small, it was about 1/2 inch, just so that I could take that hem all the way around and be done with this. I thought that this was also a really great way to do it, since you already had everything nice and serged and the edges were complete. So now it was time to put the lining into the skirt, so basically combining these two little skirts into one. And the instructions for the pattern for this step were incredibly helpful, because this could be a little confusing if you couldn't quite figure out how you're supposed to do it. But essentially you want the right sides of the outside of the skirt with the right sides of the lining to match. So as you can see here, I'm putting my skirt into the lining, and then we are just going to be making a sandwich of the right side of our lining with the zipper with the right side of the skirt, and then pinning that all the way down to wherever the end of the zipper is. So that's why we had to measure how far down the zipper went. And then you're repeating this for the second side, and then we're just going to be taking those two straight seams to attach the lining to the outside of the skirt. And then one thing I found really helpful for myself was after I did that seam, I just double checked to make sure I could still see that zipper. So as you can see, here's my zipper, and then I can see it on the other side as well. So since the zipper is still there, I know that I'm good, and I'm able to now continue on to the next steps. So the last steps really for this were just to finish off the waistband, so essentially sewing the waistband that was on the lining to the waistband of the outside of the skirt, so matching with right sides together and sewing all the way around the top. And then once you do that, this is a very easy seam as well. Now, if you were somebody like me who used that beaded fabric, again, be sure that all the beads are gone, and then you want to trim everything up, especially if you are using thicker material. So I did grade my seam so that it would lay a little flatter, and then I just took a hem all the way along the bottom, and then the last step was to really sew, and either like in a stitch in the ditch or on the edge of your waistband, just to keep it all held in place and as one final touch. So here is my completed skirt. I absolutely love it. I'm so happy that I waited and found the perfect pattern for this fabric, and I can't wait to figure out what else to use my fabric with. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe.